All right, so Elizabeth Folks, a name that you probably don't recognize. I'm not sure, maybe you do, but I didn't recognize it before the beginning of this week. Elizabeth was just a normal Protestant Christian lady in 16th century England, and she lived in Essex and in a town called Colchester. Okay, so now this was during the time and reign of Mary the First, or Mary Tudor, and you may commonly know her as Bloody Mary. Okay, and Queen Mary, she was known for her fierce reinstatement of the Roman Catholic faith in England, and she really had a particularly sad life, really, and that made her have a really nasty way of instituting her religious ideals in England. So on August 2nd, 1557, Elizabeth, she was given a choice. She could either renounce her Protestant beliefs and affirm the Catholic doctrines, or she could have her body bound up by chains, tied to a wooden stake, and set ablaze and completely burned up. And what Elizabeth chose was the latter of the two. So with thousands of onlookers, Elizabeth was led into the street along with 5 other people in the same situation as herself, and they were both unyielding in the truth, all 6 of them. At the end of the long walk from Moot Hall to High Street, Elizabeth took off her petticoat to hand to her mother, and this was a normal allowance in an execution in England, but the officials wouldn't allow it for that day. So, taking off her coat, she tossed it into the crowd, and she said, "Farewell, all the world, farewell, faith, farewell, hope." And taking the stake she would be burned at in her hand, she said, "Welcome, love." And as the official came to nail her chains to the stake, what he did was he missed the nail and struck her in the shoulder. And as the story goes, Elizabeth turned to him with tears in her eyes, but smiling, prayed for him, and then continued addressing the crowd with a smile to tell them the truth about Christ. So after her chains were fastened, all 6 martyrs had their fires lit underneath them, but there were no agonizing screams, there were no insults hurled, there were no curses rained down on the officials. Instead, the historical record shows that all 6 of them clapped their hands with joy. At the same time, the thousands in the crowd said, "The Lord strengthen them, the Lord comfort them, the Lord pour his mercies upon them." No violence, no rioting, no self-retribution or defense, even in the face of complete hopelessness as bodies were being burned alive. That's what they were saying. Love prevailed. Later that afternoon, 4 people would find the same fate as Elizabeth found. And to this day, they're known as the 10 Colchester candles. And I'm positive these 10 were met at the end of that day with a "well done, good and faithful servant." And don't get me wrong, I don't tell you this story to further the divide between the Roman Catholics and Protestants or to demonize another group. I think what we need to take from this story is twofold. One is the reaction of the martyrs, and 2 is the reaction of the crowd. In the face of unfair, intense persecution, the 10 Colchester candles refused to do anything except glorify Christ and love intensely. Even though their own kind were killing them, they found peace. They stood in the flames with love even for their executioners. On the other hand, the crowd around them was incredibly supportive. They could have easily rioted and plundered and killed the officials, but they chose to remain faithful in their support by loving the martyrs. This is true love, and Elizabeth Folks represents a true, mature follower of Jesus Christ. Hands on the stake, she said, "Welcome, love." So as we're going through the series about the church, we're going to be in Ephesians 4, 11 through 16 again today, if you'd like to get your Bibles turned to there. And I'd just like to read it again, just so we're all aware of what we're looking at today. Ephesians 4, 11 through 16 says this: "And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, to build up the body of Christ, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of God's Son, growing into maturity with a stature measured by Christ's fullness. Then we will no longer be children, little children, tossed by the waves and blown around by every wind of teaching, by human cunning, with cleverness in the techniques of deceit. But speaking the truth in love, let us grow in every way into Him who is the head, Christ. From Him, the whole body, fitted and knit together by every supporting ligament, promotes the growth of the body for building itself up in love by the proper working of each individual part. So Paul here, again, he's writing about the Ephesian church being deceived by false teachers. He warns against this deceitfulness, and he urges the Ephesian Christians to grow up, to essentially, kind of harshly, stop being babies and grow into full maturity as measured by Christ. If we grow into maturity as a church, which is the ultimate goal, again, verse 14 suggests we won't be like little children. Because little children believe anything. Have you ever played the I Have Your Nose game with a kid and they start crying immediately? I've made that mistake a few times. Literally, they will kind of believe anything you tell them. But if we're unified in our beliefs and actions as a church, we can avoid this and we can grow into Christ's fullness so cunning people and cunning spiritual beings can no longer trick us. But this morning, I really want to focus on verses 15 and 16. And I'm going to read them again. This is what they say. But speaking the truth in love, let us grow in every way into Him who is the head, Christ. From Him, the whole body, fitted and knit together by every supporting ligament, promotes the growth of the body for building itself up in love by the proper working of each individual part. So again, we see this body language, not like body language, but like language about the body with Christ as the head. That's what we see Paul using. So unity within the church means acknowledging that we are all part of this same body and all connected by what he calls supporting ligaments. Now, I know it's obvious from my peak athleticism and my six-pack, but one of my big hobbies is weightlifting. It's actually one of my only hobbies. And most people think weightlifting is just about like getting big muscles, that if you get huge muscles, you'll be really strong. And a lot of guys, especially young guys, they start abusing steroids for this reason. And the problem with steroid abuse is that it makes your muscles outgrow your tendons and your ligaments, which connect bone to bone and muscle to bone. So it happens all the time where these huge jack guys on steroids, they're on all the steroids in the world. They have their tendons literally rip off their bones because their muscles are so much bigger than what their tendons can handle. They grew the muscle while ignoring that tiny piece of tissue that held their muscle in place and made it function. And the same thing happens when we work out our own spiritual lives. We only care about ourselves without connection. And this is why we must, as a church, love those within the church. At the very least, we must love those who claim to be a part of Christ's church. See, the ligaments that connect us all together, we're all in the body of Christ. What we see happening is the same thing as the bodybuilder. We want ourselves to get huge. We want our way in the church. We want the attention. We want the friendships that benefit us. What happens almost always is this cataclysmic event. Either you fall away because you're a mere piece of the muscle in the body, becomes too large with pride, with greed, with anger, you name it, or you inadvertently cut off another part of the body because there's no connection. And you wonder why the church suddenly seems devoid of these great relationships like we used to have. Remember back in the day when we were all friends and we all got along. It's because the relational aspects have to be maintained. They have to be worked out and fortified. Because Paul says that's what causes growth, togetherness, lives that are intertwined, that cannot function without one another. We must intensely love one another intentionally. Jesus addresses this love to his disciples many times, but it's extremely apparent in John's gospel, starting in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. This is what Jesus says, "I give you a new command, love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Now, we know from the scriptures that this isn't really a new command. Jesus says this is a new command, but that's not the command that's new. We know, and the disciples know, that in Leviticus 19 it says to love your neighbor as yourself. Many, many giant portions of the Old Testament are dedicated to being fair and just and how valuable a friend is. But this command is new because Jesus says, just as I have loved you. That's a game changer. Just as I collected you from your lowly jobs to make you my disciples, just as I've defended you from the Pharisees, just as I've been patient with you in all of your blunders, just as I will wash your feet and I will hang on a cross for you, just as I have loved you, love one another. We're called to replicate the love of Jesus around us, even that means mockery, slander, violence, or even death. Jesus is very clear about our responsibility to truly love one another. Mark 12:31, when Jesus is talking about the greatest commandments, he says this, "The second is love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other command greater than these." And the first, of course, was to love God. But this isn't possible without loving one another. Because to love others is to love God, and to love God is to love people. There can be no separation of those two concepts. 1 Peter 3:8-9 says this, "Finally, all of you be like-minded and sympathetic, love one another, and be compassionate and humble, not paying back evil for evil or insult for insult, but on the contrary, giving a blessing, since you are called for this, so that you may inherit a blessing." Here's the thing about love in the church. This is what makes us known to the world. This is what makes us different. Outsiders should be looking in our doors. They should be looking in our lives and wondering why we're so weird, you know? Why are they loving each other? Why are they acting differently? Why do they forgive grudges? Why are they so generous with their money and their stuff? Why are they not angry with each other? Why do they not ostracize those who are different? Why are they so accepting of people who can't give them anything in return? This is how the church should be viewed. But unfortunately, we taint that by sin. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. We must strengthen our ligaments and connections with one another through love. Because when one ligament is damaged, the whole body suffers. You may even be damaging your own connected ligament by pulling away. And I'll tell you, that does affect you for sure, but what it also does is affects everyone else because it's not isolated to you. So I urge you to stay in this connection, stay in this relationship with one another, even when it's hard, because it's not easy. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about those outside the church? Don't they deserve love too? And I don't think I'd be a good pastor if I said no. So, the answer to that is a resounding yes. We must love those outside the church, and that includes our enemies. Matthew 5, verse 46-47 says this, "For if you love those who love you, what reward will you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what are you doing out of the ordinary? Don't even the Gentiles do the same?" We're known by our love for our own, but equally for our love for everyone else. This is an extension of our mark as followers of Christ by loving one another. We must be known by our love, which extends outside our Christian circles. And there is perhaps no better call out in the Bible regarding love than when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. I'm sure most of us are familiar with that story. As it goes, a man is beat up and robbed and stripped naked and left for dead on the road. And then a Jewish priest and a Levite, who is also a Jew, they walked right past them. Right? They didn't help them. They were in the highest esteem. They should have known God's law intimately, but they passed the man and did nothing. But a Samaritan man, seen by the Jews as having a status lower than a human, he passes by, he picks up the man, he fed him, he bandages him up, and he pays for his entire stay in a hotel to recover. This man had nothing to gain from helping a damaged bystander with no money that probably hated him. This Samaritan man showed far more love than the Jewish men, even though his religion wasn't of Yahweh. And this is a great story, but often we forget why Jesus is telling them this story. The parable Jesus tells is in response to a scribe or an expert of the law. He asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Okay, this expert of the law who should have known God, he should have known his God, Yahweh. He asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Essentially, what he's trying to do is find the technicality. He's trying to find out who he should love and who he's allowed to hate. But what Jesus does is he gives no room for this technicality, and he instead just crushes the cultural and normative values held by that Jewish expert. And a lot of times I think we do the same. We find any excuse we can to not love someone else. It's inconvenient, it can get messy. The person doesn't seem to like me. They aren't in my immediate comfort zone to deal with. They can't provide anything to me. They might just take my love and squander it. They hate me. And all these excuses, what they are is lies from the devil, because if Elizabeth Folks, as she's being burned alive, continued to pray for her captors, if Stephen, as he's getting stones hurled at him, can say, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them," if Jesus Christ, hanging on the cross, can say, "Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing," then we can love people who spit in our faces. Because the mark of a true, mature Christian is this, that we continue to look at our enemies not as heathens, not as outsiders, not as animals, but as people made in the image of God. How do you know if someone is a true disciple? How do you know if they're a mature follower of Christ? Sure, we can look at their quiet times. We can look at how much they know about the Bible. We can see how much they pray or how much they listen to Christian radio. But what we need to look at is how they treat people in opposition, in confrontation. How do you treat people who hurl curses at you, who hate you and hate God? The difference between the church and the world is our love for even those who hate us. So, how do we do these things? The first thing I think we can do is speak truth in love, and this is what Paul says in Ephesians. We mustn't back down from the truth in order to appear loving. That's not loving. That's a watered-down, superficial version of the wonderful good news that we've been given. Being loving is not equivalent with backing down. A man named Tertullian was an early church father. He had many opponents. He had a lot of enemies. And he spoke highly against Christian persecution. So to those killing Christians, he stood up to the governors at the time, and he says this, "Go on, rack, torture, grind us to powder. Our numbers increase in proportion as ye mow us down. The blood of Christians is their harvest seed. Your very obstinacy is a teacher. For who is not incited by the contemplation of it to inquire what there is in the core of the matter? And who, after having joined us, does not long suffer?" That's a pretty hard line. The point of taking a stand is always love. It must be rooted in glorifying the name of Christ, even if it means your demise. When we stop telling the truth in love, our gospel story stops making sense. Because without telling the truth of Jesus and saving us from the depths of hell, how much could we possibly love the recipients of our message? I think the second thing we can do is this, to love in action. 1 John 3:18 says this, "Little children, let us not love in word or speech, but in action and truth." See, it's not enough to love in your head. It's not enough to believe you love others. Aren't you glad God takes this love in action approach with us? Aren't you glad God doesn't love you in his theologies or his beliefs or his doctrines? No, for God so loved the world that he sent his only Son. Love is followed by a verb. Do you love your neighbor? Do you love your church? Do you love your enemies? Then you need to show them. Cyprian, another early church father who was also martyred, he wrote a treatise of encouragement for his people less than a year before his execution and martyrdom. He writes this, "Beloved brethren, we are philosophers not in words, but in deeds. We exhibit our wisdom not by our dress, but by our truth. We know virtues by their practice rather than boasting of them. We do not speak great things, but we live them." Elizabeth showed her love in action. Jesus showed his love in action. We need to not simply put on the outer garments of love. We need to be moved to love, to action, to true action. So friends, let us love in action, just as Jesus did.